At a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, what are the Utah Jazz doing over this current offseason? And the answer may be a little bit easier and more to the point than some of us even think. Thanks for tuning in to this video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to help support the channel. With that being said, we're going to be covering what exactly has occurred thus far this offseason and what we can expect to happen going forward, as well as taking a quick glance at the Summer League roster, because that seems to be the upcoming highlight of this year. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. The Utah Jazz have yet to make an offseason trade since the free agency period started, and the only move that they've significantly made was to waive Omer Yurtseven in favor of signing Drew Eubanks, which doesn't really push the needle either way. It kind of confused me, and still to this very moment actually does. They still are trying to shop, or at the very least entertain, possible trade offers for their lone star Lauri Markkanen, and then there have been word and rumblings of the possibility of either JC's, John Collins, or Jordan Clarkson, or Colin Sexton potentially being traded. But it seems as though because of the contracts that Jordan Clarkson and John Collins are on, they might have to keep them on the roster for this season if they can't find anything substantial, because most teams just don't seem to have a heavy amount of interest in either one of them. Colin Sexton garners more interest, but seeing as they ended up allowing Chris Dunn to go in a sign-and-trade situation that sent him to the Clippers, it seems as though Colin Sexton is going to serve as the veteran leader for that guard pool for those that were on the roster and those that are coming in this season. Out of the four, I think that his position is the most solidified. I also think that Lauri Markkanen, as of recent reports, seems to be more likely than not staying with the Utah Jazz, even though they're going to end up tanking this season. So it does make sense that they're going to find themselves in a situation where you have a attempt to try and force a trade with Jordan Clarkson or John Collins, and if it doesn't happen, it just ends up being something where you have to eat their salary for another year, and then you can trade them away and send them off as an expiring contract that teams will be more than willing to take on in the right situation. However, it's time to look at the upcoming impressionable youngsters, and that leads us to talk about the 2024 Summer League roster. It is composed of Max Abmas, Armando Bacot, Darius Bazley, Isaiah Collier, Kyle Filipowski, Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Keyshawn Justice, Walker Kessler, Tavion Kinsey, Kenneth Lofton Jr., Josh Pierre-Louis, Jason Preston, Babacar Sane, Bryce Sensabaugh, and Cody Williams. Effectively, half of those players are on the main roster already, and some of them will have the opportunity to just find polished games. If you're like Walker Kessler and you had a poor season last year, you need to show that you're making strides to be a better player and be a more reliable person on this roster, lest he potentially get traded, because they're having rumors for him as well. Keontae George will look to be more successful than he was, kind of building off of the reputation he built for himself last season and also the performances that he put together in the Summer League last year while leading a young cast of guys trying to continue forward. We saw Kenneth Lofton Jr. actually lose a little bit of weight this offseason, but he's going to continue to try and prove that he's worthy of the roster spot and see if he can nab a more guaranteed and deserving contract that will have more M's behind his name. I'm interested to see specifically how Jason Preston kind of fits into things, because we saw him come in at the very tail end of last season and not much materialized from it. But in the G League, he's been a triple-double machine previously. The most interesting rookies that will be on our roster, surprisingly enough, Armando out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So he might be an interesting person, though he doesn't necessarily fit the stretch big persona that a lot of people would prefer. And speaking of which, we have Kyle Filipowski, which I will be very interested to see how he ends up fitting things out coming out of Duke. Having that ability to stretch the floor and also be somewhat of an offensive passing hub, I think that will be very interesting to put on display. Isaiah Collier will be able to show how much he's grown, how much less turnover prone he is, and how well his shooting stroke has actually gotten since the college season had concluded. Naturally, Bryce Sensabaugh is going to fly a little bit under the radar just because of his scoring skill set and just lack of defensive aptitude at times, but I believe that he will show us something sneaky good, or at least I hope so. And the one player, more importantly than anybody else, that I'm really interested in seeing is going to be Cody Williams, because I believe that he can be a day one contributor out the gate. I would like to see how his defense ends up holding up. He is listed as being 6'8", 190, but he was weighed out as being somewhere around 180. Now, I'm not going to sit here and weight watch out here, but it is going to be something important to keep in mind as time goes on. I don't think that that's going to be the end of the road for him in particular, and he gives me the energy of a Jaden McDaniels when it comes to defensive ability. If you can get a shooting stroke right and shoot it in more copious amounts and be willing to take those threes, then he could be the perfect Jaden McDaniels type player for this Utah Jazz roster as the years end up going beyond. It's going to be interesting to see how things end up ultimately playing out, but I do believe that this is going to be a surprisingly stacked team right here, all things considered, naturally, because half of the guys are on the actual official roster and played big minutes last season, particularly over that second half after the trade deadline occurred. Because if you remember correctly, Taylor Hendricks took most of his starts then. He came up from the G League and got most of his minutes at that point. Keontae George already had a starting stint before that, but definitely had one immediately after that. And then Bryce Sensabaugh even got some starts and played some heavy minutes at certain points during that period of time as well. Walker Kessler needs to show that he's poised to take the game by the reins this year, and I think that him being on this Summer League roster will be something that does really big wonders for him. And then, as I said before, Kenneth Lofton Jr. is going to be a big player as well. Naturally, I expect a lot of the main team players that aren't in that conversation, that are a bit older, obviously the John Collins, your Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sextons, your Larry Markkanens, those type of guys will end up watching from afar and just observing how those guys end up taking steps forward. And if they do all end up on the roster together, then they're going to be growing in a symbiotic relationship, I would like to hope, because the expectation is that Jordan Clarkson, after the abysmal season that he had last year, probably doesn't survive too significantly long unless another team just doesn't want him for anything at all. And then, of course, John Collins has had his value kind of go up and down. Yes, he has a shooting ability, but defensively, he was struggling a lot in the first half of last season. He ended up riding the ship later on, but he has been, by no stretch of the imagination, been perfect. That said, I do have a lot of faith in this team to get the job done, and by get the job done, I mean be pretty rough, see a lot of learning curves be hit this season, and hopefully end up with a lottery pick that is very high on the draft boards next season, which will allow them to take part in one of the better top-heavy type classes that we've seen in recent memory. The only thing that would be very Utah Jazz-like would be if we ended up being in the bottom 3 teams in the league and still managed to get like the 7th pick or the 8th pick in the draft. That would be very Utah Jazz-esque to occur. But fingers crossed that doesn't end up happening. And I am looking forward to seeing what moves end up happening in the rest of this offseason. Do you guys think that Larry Markkanen will get traded? I know I've done several videos on different teams, and the most recent team to pop out of the woodworks and say that something might end up popping off was going to be the Sacramento Kings and potentially the Golden State Warriors. Let me know what you guys think about that. Do you think that one of the JCs or Colin Sexton could also be on the trade block, or do you think Walker Kessler could be sought after by another team? Or do you think that we're just going to keep running it with the guys that we have after Larry Markkanen ends up signing his max contract extension on August 6th? With that being said, thanks for tuning in this video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. Go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications if you are into the Utah Jazz or NBA content in general. And as always, good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.